Hi, I'm Jeff Hirota, the CEO of Community Foundation Boulder County. The Community Foundation has affirmed a guiding vision of equity, and by that we mean creating systems where all can thrive in Boulder County. We'll talk about what your Community Foundation is doing to make equity a reality, and you'll learn what you can do individually also, and what we can do together to advance equity in Boulder County. Today I'd like you to meet Magnolia Landa-Posas, who has served as Community Engagement Manager for the Just Transition Collaborative, where she developed the Climate Justice Leaders Program and supported relationships, projects, and policies in Boulder County that addressed issues of eco-social justice. Most recently, she joined the Student Voice and Leadership team at Denver Public Schools. Magnolia is a board member of the Latino Task Force of Boulder County and El Centro Amistad, and she is a Voices for Children CASA volunteer. And we're very proud that Magnolia is also a former leadership fellow of the Community Foundation. So, Magnolia, we work at a variety of concerns in our community, but no matter what we're talking about, we often hear, of course, none of this matters if we don't care for our environment and ourselves. And the Community Foundation's Environmental Affinity Group is connecting donors who are passionate about working together to address environmental concerns. City and County of Boulder is a leader of open space and its commitment to battling climate change. But we're also aware of environmental injustice. And for example, we know that the greatest correlation between hazardous waste and a community experiencing that is race. We also know that care for the environment by people of color is more than a consequence of poverty or environmental injustice. And at the same time, we find that people of color aren't always seen or represented as environmentalists. So I wonder if you could talk from your perspective, Magnolia, about what you see as the essential challenge of environmental work in Boulder County.
I would say that there's amazing work being done at the city and the county level in terms of building around awareness and having conversations about the need to address issues of sustainability and environmental issues at large. I do think that there is space to have conversations, like very intentional conversations about environmental justice. And by that I mean recognizing that oftentimes when we are talking about an environmental issue, it's very much connected to some type of social issue that impacts, like you mentioned, communities of color and low-income communities. And I think if we're able to have intentional conversations about race and class and how poverty influences some of the lived experiences of those communities in regards to environmental justice, then we would be able to address solutions that impact the entire community as opposed to maybe just a few, or solving or putting forth solutions that are only also going to be accessible by a few members of the community as opposed to the entire community. Something else that I also think is very important to do is have conversations around, well, what is the lived experience, but also what is the knowledge that communities of color and low-income communities already hold around environmental issues. Many community members, and especially when we're talking about immigrant communities, they're coming to the U.S. with a lot of knowledge already around how to interact with the land, and I think that often comes from values that are instilled on them, but also community and cultural norms that make it clear that we're connected to the land, that the land is part of us, and we should treat it just as we would any other member in our community, if not more, to ensure that we're able to have an ecosystem where we could all thrive.
Magnolia, would you feel comfortable sharing a personal story that kind of illustrates what you're talking about?
Yeah. Me and all of my siblings have always really had this interest for talking about social justice, and I think that stems from my mother. She has always been somebody that has pushed us to advocate for what we want and for what's right. But what we have all learned from our father is the beauty in being able to disconnect from society when it's at its most hectic, when we're all just very entrenched in what work is, and look to the land for some of that spirituality, but I think more than that, for some of that grounding. And I remember since we were really, really small, we would go back and forth from here to Mexico almost every summer, sometimes December too. And one of the most beautiful things that we would see is going out to El Cerro, which is like the mountain tops with my dad. And he would just spend hours with us, like telling us about all the different birds that were there. And he would know them all by name. He would be able to recognize their call. And then would also be able to read tracks and tell us like these are the tracks of like certain animals and creatures, but also very well, he was also able to like, and this is something that me and my sister still don't understand how he does it, but able to identify like what's edible and what's not edible. So whether it was like a bush or some plant or a fruit. And that is just something that I think stick with us in terms of, that is something about my dad that is never valued once he comes back to the US context, right? Once he comes back here, he's just a construction worker. He's somebody that just has to follow the rules or has to complete the project within a certain given amount of time. And he doesn't really have a lot of flexibility around like how much he can argue for his pay, right? And that always hurt us because we knew he held all this wealth of knowledge, and we were able to see him in a lot of ways like come alive. And that's true of my mom too, like when they're back in their land, when they're able to connect, when they're able to like produce their own food and then be able to have access to food that is like made that same day, that is from my like grandparents' garden. There's something about their energy that just like stands up, right? It's something about them that they're proud. They just look alive, if that makes sense. And when they're back here, it's just like there's bills to pay, there's work to do. And what hurts is that other people don't recognize that in them. That they're just like immigrants, that they're just here to produce, and that they don't have anything worthwhile. And so, and I think that has driven me and my sisters to really think about, it's important to use our advocacy beyond just ourselves and our communities to extend it to the land, because the land gives us life. And we have seen it do that for my parents. And it's something that they always look forward to. It's like, when are we next going to be going and taking a vacation so that they could de-stress and reconnect.
So Magnolia, that is a deeply spiritual and heart connection with the land that goes beyond, just talking about it conceptually. What are we missing right here in Boulder County about how we care for the environment and the earth?
I mean, I think key is storytelling, and key is being able to acknowledge the lived experience that people have, and recognizing that everybody has either a connection with their land or a lack of connection with Mother Earth. That I think also brings its own group of issues, and that can sometimes, I think, make people feel like either depleted or like they're missing something. And I think that's something that I consistently see missing in Boulder County. It's like, how are we really getting down and talking about the impact that it has on every single person beyond, like you just said, the conceptual, beyond just the policy? Like, how are we talking about the impacts that it has on all our community members, especially those that have been forced to be marginalized, or that we invisibilize, or that we don't talk about as often? And how do we bring that to the front as a way to then produce solutions that can impact positively, not just the lives of those communities, but also hopefully the environment and the world around us.
So if you were to kind of express that as a call to action to an individual in Boulder County, what would you say?
Well, I think there's a couple of layers. I think one, there's a need to focus individually, like what is it that I at the individual level need to do, and I think that has to do a lot with education. Like, how do I self-educate myself too, but also reach out to communities that are doing environmental justice work to further learn about some of the concerns and issues. And with that is learning things like I did in college from a mentor, like the Latino community. Actually, when you look at their voting in regards to sustainability issues, they're voting significantly higher or in support of environmental initiatives than even their white counterparts, right? So I think one is like educating ourselves to kind of push back on those biases that we might have, or those either biases, or also to push on our ideology around who we think is an environmentalist. Who do we usually identify as somebody that cares about the environment? So I think that has to happen for ourselves individually. And then I think as a community, we also need to push ourselves and the organizations in our community to think about how do we center equity in environmental and sustainability work. And I think if we're able to do that, then we could produce sustainability solutions that go beyond maybe just technology, which I think is very much needed and important, but at figuring out once that technology is deployed, right? For instance, a solar panel. Who's going to have the monetary ability to access solar panels? Who isn't? And then also, maybe some of them are owners of mobile home parks. Are they going to be able to install solar panels in the rooftops? And if that's not the case, how are we then proactively also thinking about maybe solar gardens for those communities and not just solar panels that go on roofing? So I think if we're able to really center equity, we're able to get to those questions ahead of time, as opposed to providing a solution that then once it's done, we realize that it's only helping or impacting a small group of folks, or the people that are the most privileged or have the most access in our community. That I think is important. And then two, I think even working with like the community foundation is how do we work with the community foundation to figure out how we can best partner and put our efforts and our money into work that either already is starting to happen around like the environment and sustainability, or maybe what's missing and who's missing at the table that maybe we should bring in.
Do you have any advice that you would say on how do we build an inclusive coalition of environmentalists?
I love that you bring that up, because I think coalition building is huge, especially when we're talking about making sure that everybody's at the table. I think it's thinking about who in the community, what are the organizations that maybe we have placed into a very, like maybe have identified as they just work with the Latino community, or maybe they just do health equity work, and maybe try to see maybe those communities to some extent are also doing environmental justice work. Maybe they're just not even recognizing it for themselves, or maybe they have. Or how do we diversify who we are reaching out to consistently around sustainability and environment? So how do we diversify that coalition to bring in people that are working around racial justice? Because there's probably going to be some overlap with environmental justice. How do we bring in folks that are working around maybe food justice, that are maybe not the typical people that we think about when talking about food justice? Who are the folks working around immigration that are doing some good work around that, but maybe can also start leveraging that community to, one, bring out their experiences and their their knowledge around the environment, so that we recognize that they hold that knowledge, but also to again, build that coalition where we're recognizing that the environment is connected to every social issue in our society.
Well, thank you for mentioning the Community Foundation. One thing the Community Foundation is working on is the Environmental Trust, which supports nonprofit organizations in Boulder County working on the environment with a priority of equity. And presently, a donation to the Environmental Trust will be matched dollar for dollar up to $50,000. So we hope that you will support that. Magnolia, thank you for your insight and your leadership and your conscience in this work in our community.
Thank you, Jeff, for the invitation.